G'day mates, it's Busta here. So before the video begins, I just wanted to let you all know that I'm going to return to the long form content again. This means I'll be posting 1 or 2 longer videos a week with a compilation of true scary stories being featured. The reason for this is that, through my assessments, I found that the longer you guys watch, the better the channel does. Plus, regardless of YouTube's algorithm, I don't want to lose my roots. This channel was built because of what we have here, and I don't want to lose that, for anything, even if it means taking a hit from the algorithm. So, if you want to support this channel, and if you want to help this channel grow, please be sure to watch this video all the way through, and feel free to go and watch more of my videos straight after this one to help out if you wish. Also, I've decided that I'm going to take my series stories over to Twitch permanently to diversify a little. So if you would like to listen to the series stories, please open a tab in your window by right-clicking the link to my Twitch account in the description below, and hit the follow button to be notified of when I'm live streaming and when new videos are out. It's completely free to follow and make an account too. I also will likely be doing a scary story night live stream there too, where I'll be listening to stories, talking and having a nice night with all of you guys once a week. And if this sounds like something you would enjoy, be sure to follow me on Twitch. And finally guys, I want to do more subscriber stories and less Reddit stories moving forward. So if you want the chance to have your story featured on the channel, please send it through to my email, which is also in the description below. Thank you guys so much for all of your support. I hope you enjoy the video, and without further ado, let's begin. A few weeks ago, my boyfriend was running late to work. So instead of dropping me off at my work, he dropped me off at the metro station stop next to his work. There's a stop that's only a few minutes walk away from campus, so I wasn't too worried about it. As I'm waiting for the train at the stop, a random person thanks me for my service. I'm caught off guard, but realize that I had my military backpack on, complete with my last name stitched on it. A man, covered in face tattoos and wearing dirty, smelly clothes, overhears and walks over to me as well. "Oh, you're in the military. My wife is too. She's the X position for Y unit. Actually, you look really familiar. Were you at the holiday party at the racetrack?" The specifics checked out, but I definitely didn't remember a guy with face tattoos showing up at the event. I tell him that I might know her, but it's a big unit. The train comes and I walk on to take my seat. "Smith? Amanda Smith? I knew I recognized you." I turn around and it's Face Tattoo Man. He knows my whole name and decides to sit down next to me on the train. He starts asking me questions about my job and how his wife is doing. He says that she was feeling stressed out with her job and that she was worried that she was going to get fired. I thought it was a little weird, considering that she had been fired over a week prior, but maybe he was trying to be polite and not embarrass her. But then, he started asking some really strange questions. Where do we go for off-site training? When do we go? When's the next time I'll train with her? I realized something was really wrong, so I get off at the next stop to try and get away from this guy. But he gets off the train too. "Let's go together. You never answered my questions." I look for my phone to call someone to get me out of this situation, and realize that I left it in my boyfriend's car. I decide to tell him that I got off at a wrong stop, and try to get on a different car than him when the next train arrives, but he gets onto mine at the next stop. He starts threatening me about giving him information about her, so I stand up and start making a scene, saying that I need help. A man intervenes and I get off at the next stop, which is actually my stop. I contact that woman, and it turns out that since the holiday party, he had started doing heroin and became violent toward her. She and the kids moved out to an undisclosed location, and he tried abducting them at least once. He had become homeless, so that explains why I didn't recognize him at all. He did recognize me from the party though, and he was trying to figure out when she would next be around. She had a restraining and no contact order against him, so she encouraged me to contact the police if this ever happened again. I decided not to take the train anymore and ditch my backpack altogether. Last week, I was working late and decided to walk over by the train stop to get some food. As I'm waiting to cross at the crosswalk, I hear, "Amanda? Good to see you." I look behind me, and Face Tattoo Guy is standing behind me. I turn and take off sprinting down the busy road to get away. I'm definitely staying away from that whole line, forever. When I was younger, my mum was dating this guy, who we'll call JB, and after a few months, he invited my mum, me, and my brother to go with him and his son, about my age, out to his lake house for the weekend. It was right on Lake Michigan, but in a more secluded area, which was pretty awesome. Well, we got there and, for one, I already felt pretty creeped out. It was a smaller 2, maybe 3 if you count the really big attic-story house that had the living room, dining room, kitchen on the first floor, and had 2 bedrooms on the second floor. His grandfather had helped build the place with his dad, and then he lived there for most of his life working as a tailor in the nearby town. We went up to the attic to get some beach toys because that's where JB kept all of that stuff, so he didn't have to haul it out every time he went out there. Well, when we went up to the attic, I noticed in the corner, covered in some dust and cobwebs, about 8 mannequins, some just upper torsos and some full body. It was nothing out of the ordinary, considering a tailor had lived there. Me and JB's son slept down in the living room on the couch since there were no more beds, and near midnight-ish, I heard on the stairs a squeak a few times. Figuring it was my mum coming to check to make sure that we were asleep, I told his son to be quiet and quickly turned the TV off and hid under the covers. After not hearing any noise for a few minutes, I looked out from under the covers and saw 3 of the mannequins moving around in the kitchen. Like, their body parts weren't moving, but they were sliding around the kitchen. I swore I was dreaming, but was so terribly frightened I hid back under the covers with a small yelp, and then heard the dragging on the floor coming closer, and peeked out, seeing one of them just a few feet from the couch. I hid back under the covers and shut my eyes tight, hoping it would go away. I stayed like that for some hours, but eventually the sounds went away and I fell asleep. The next morning I got up, I tried not to think about it, really hoping that it was just a bad dream. But when we went back to the attic to put the beach stuff back, the mannequins were in different spots and weren't covered in cobwebs anymore. Look, I know this sounds crazy, and you don't have to believe me if you don't want to, but I know that it happened, and I've been scared shitless of mannequins ever since. It started when my mother and her 2 sisters, Louise and Teresa, were playing around in a cemetery. I know, what the fuck were they playing in a cemetery for? You got me by the arse on that one. My mother apparently forgot about the age-old don't walk on the actual grave's arsehole rule while they were playing hide and seek and was running from Teresa. She stepped onto the grave and the ground gave way and she fell into the grave. According to her, the grave was from 1907 and bore the same name as hers. They scooped some of the dirt out, took it home, and got a Ouija board out. Jimi Hendrix had just passed away and her older sister decided that she wanted to contact him. They decided that the best way to increase the power of the board was to sprinkle the grave dirt around the board, light some candles, and turn out the lights. Jimi Hendrix didn't answer them, obviously. But a woman named Amy did, and she apparently thoroughly chastised them for being naughty girls. The bloodshed immediately after moved to goodbye. According to all 3 women, the room was silent until the wind picked up outside and blew around outside of the house in such a way that it sounded like a shrieking woman and moaning man all at the same time. And there was no wind in the room, yet the candle flames instantly went out and the lamp on the bedside table switched on by itself. All 3 girls ran screaming out of the room and hid in their father's room, between the wall and the bed. After they calmed down and no longer felt threatened, they discussed what had to be done next. They went back into Louise's bedroom where they had been performing the seance, brushed the dirt into a linen handkerchief, retrieved the board, retrieved salt and matches from the cupboard in the kitchen, and went outside. In the backyard, they said the Lord's Prayer while holding hands, sprinkled the board and grave dirt with salt, poured gasoline on the items and burned them. They went back inside, feeling like it was over, and tried not to think about it anymore. Nothing happened for a few weeks, until the youngest, Louise, began having terrible nightmares, to which she would wake up screaming several times at night. My mother was next, followed by her older sister, Teresa. My grandparents, both very quiet and not the type to tell tall tales, described the upcoming months as nights with no sleep, rushing from one room to another, flicking lights on and off, falling into bed after soothing one daughter, drifting into sleep, only to be awakened by another screaming girl. This went on for several months, and then stopped abruptly. Just as my grandparents were beginning to feel rested, Louise began screaming for her mother and father in the night again. "There are people in my room!" According to Louise, she would wake up because she could hear people talking. When she would open her eyes, the bedroom lights would be on, and there would be a man and a woman standing in the corner of a bedroom, sipping cocktails and having discussions about the weather. My grandmother started sleeping in a bed with her now 16-year-old daughter. For the first few days, nothing happened. Then my aunt poked her awake in the middle of the night. Grandma opened her eyes and looked around the room, seeing nothing, heard no noises. When she began to ask Louise why she woke her up, Louise grabbed a fistful of her nightgown and said, "Shh." And then the lamp on the bedside table turned itself on. My grandmother jumped out of bed, grabbed Louise by the arm, and dragged her into my grandpa's bedroom. She woke him up and told him what had happened, and they both slept in his bed for the next several weeks until Teresa, now 18 and going off to college, moved out, at which time they moved Louise into Teresa's old bedroom. There were more things that happened over the years, but it slowly tapered off into an every once in a while thing once they moved Louise into another bedroom. Now, 47 years later, that bedroom is like a time capsule. My grandmother used to clean it weekly, but they never moved anything out of it except Louise's clothing. All the furnishings have stayed the same, and after years of refurbishing every other room in the house, that room still has pea green shag carpeting and orange and gold owl wallpaper. Since Grandma died 10 years ago, no one has really bothered with the room, except for the occasional cleaning it gets when there's one too many extra overnight guests and someone has to sleep in there. And no one ever makes it all night. We almost always wake up to find this person sleeping on the couch. At night, when no one is in the room, you can hear people talking. A lot of people, like there's some kind of party going on in there, coming from that room. As a child, that room was the source of nightmares. All the older cousins would play tricks on the younger ones to force them into that room, only to lock them in. I myself was locked in the closet when I was 7, but that's a whole nother story. Until their cries for help attracted adult attention, or even just the standard, "You're too little to play with us. You have to stay back in the bedroom for 5 minutes alone if you want to play." There have been small bouts of activity throughout the home over the years, but it's really just something that everyone is used to. And for the last 35 years or so, that room has just kind of belonged to them. Okay, so a little backstory. I was kicked out of my parents' home when I was 18. I belonged to a religious group called Jehovah's Witnesses. They were a very tight-knit community that took care of each other. My best friend Ricky, who was in his mid-20s, had an extra room in his house and he reached out to me to live with him. I was happy with the offer, but he was married. He had been married for 3 years to his wife Melissa. I didn't want to impose on their marriage. However, Rick promised Melissa was on board and Melissa even told me to move in. So I did. This was in October of 2010. At first, it was really cool. I was on the same work schedule as Rick, so whenever he would go to work, I was gone too. I did my best not to impose, so I would sometimes stay out late with friends to give Rick and Melissa space. One day, probably a week later after I moved in, Rick called me on my phone and said, "Hey, where are you? You need to come home now, please." I was weirded out, so I rushed home. This had never happened before, so I was really confused. I opened the door. I had my own key, and Melissa was inside the master bedroom making a lot of noise. It sounded like she was throwing clothes around, and she kept saying, "I'm not going," over and over again. I was confused because Melissa had always been such a sweetheart. I asked Rick what was going on. He explained to me that Melissa was mentally ill and she would get like this every now and then. This floored me. I was completely unaware of Melissa's mental illness. It had never been apparent. He asked me to just record everything that she was doing on a little video camera. I asked why, and he said, "Because she needs to see how she acts when she has her episodes. She doesn't believe that she has them. She doesn't remember any of it." I reluctantly agreed. Rick opened the door and Melissa just sat there on the bed and stared at Rick. When she noticed I was there, she pointed and said, You did this! It was you!" in a really manly and psychotic voice. She was even foaming at the mouth. I didn't respond. I was just in shock. Rick was able to convince Melissa to come out of the bedroom and to sit in the living room. Keep in mind, I am still recording. Melissa began to talk in a British accent, even though she was Mexican, and called herself some weird name that I can't remember. Melissa explained that she was trying to save her alter ego from the bad woman. This was all very confusing. All of a sudden, she changed accents again and started trying to get up and thrash the house around, and was calling me and Rick pig fuckers. Melissa's face changed, and it was horrifying, and the screams were just creepy. Then she would sit down and laugh and point at me, screaming at the top of her lungs, "It's you." The cops showed up and took Melissa to a psych hospital on psychiatric hold. I later found out that it was Rick who called the cops moments before I got there. After Melissa was transported, Rick was getting ready to go and meet her. As he gathered his belongings, he told me that the reason he wanted me to live at his home was for his safety. I asked how long this had been going on for, and he said that it had started soon after they got married, but that it was just getting way worse. Melissa came home a few days later, and I didn't see her. Every time I was home, she would lock herself in a bedroom. I was pretty weirded out by it, but relieved that I didn't have to deal with the aftermath of the incident. About a week later, I was on one of the home phones with a girl I was courting at the time. During the conversation, I could hear breathing on the other line. My friend asked me if it was me breathing hard, and I said no. All of a sudden, I hear the doorknob to my room turning, followed by banging on my door. A violent voice starts screaming, "Let me in, you're in my house, it's you." My friend could hear it on her side of the phone line and freaked out, and I just hung up to prevent people from knowing Melissa was ill. I jumped out of the window, it was a single-story house, and ran to my car. I saw Melissa running out of the front door and running towards my car as I drove away. The problem was that the house was on a court, and my car was facing towards the dead-end portion of the court, so I had to drive and turn around to get into the main street and pass by Melissa. Melissa was standing in the middle of the court. I was able to drive past her by swiping the curb, but just as I did, Melissa just violently slapped at my car and started screaming. I got away, but I decided that day that I would live in my car until I could afford to rent my own place. I didn't have many belongings, so I figured that it'd be for the best. Rick safeguarded my belongings by having his parents move them to their garage for me to pick them up there. It wasn't until weeks later that I found out that my clothes had pieces of paper with weird messages quoting the Bible, long letters informing me that I was at fault for all the negativity, letters about how I had demons inside of my body, and all sorts of other crazy things. They were in my suits, flannel shirts, jeans, shoe soles, everywhere. And that was the worst experience with a human being I've ever had. I decided to write in story format and share about a true event that stuck with me for the past couple of decades. Feel free to chime in your thoughts, experiences, or possible explanations. I wasn't happy leaving my friends before my freshman year to move into our new home in the country. The house originally belonged to my late great aunt, who passed away due to heart complications. She suffered from a stroke in the back room of the home, which used to be a laundry room. The original house was small, only containing a living area, kitchen, and the back room. My great aunt even kept her bed in the kitchen due to the house's 1930s layout. We spent our life savings building a new 2-story addition, as my stepfather was a carpenter. Unfortunately, he also had a bad addiction with alcohol. While building onto the house, we would come visit to find a concerning amount of beer cans on the ground. My mother and him would scream and yell at one another. It made the environment extremely unsettling, as nobody liked to witness their parents fighting. But it also just made the home feel very unwelcoming. It's strange to explain, but it felt as though the house had never experienced those emotions from people. During the building process, we even had a worker claim to see a woman with a blank expression in the kitchen window, even though there wasn't a woman present at the time. Construction came to a halt as finances tightened. We were left with the new 2-story addition, but the inside walls weren't complete and the studs were left exposed. In other words, you could see through the rooms. Nonetheless, I set up camp and claimed my new bedroom, grateful for a roof over my head. While settling in the new living situation, I would personally experience lights suddenly coming on in the kitchen, the toilet flushing in the middle of the night, and footsteps. Now, being a non-believer in anything paranormal, my 13-year-old self chalked it up to new or old electricity, foundation settling, age of the house, etc., as I had given a hand with much of the construction and learned quite a bit. I didn't, and still don't, consider these items to be anything out of the ordinary. One evening, everyone began the nightly routine of preparing for bed. I went to the restroom that was connected to the back room where my aunt had suffered her stroke. When stepping down into the laundry room, I felt a sudden sense of dread, like something was right on top of me. I figured it could just be the foundation having issues being level, but didn't appreciate the feeling to say the least. I ended up brushing my teeth and just getting into bed. But I had issues shaking that feeling. It was approximately 11 p.m. when I finally laid down again. There was dead silence in the air, as we didn't have ceiling fans or air conditioning available yet. We just had stagnant air. I was on my back, looking around at the studded walls. I could even see my little sister's room and hear my parents adjusting in bed upstairs. I looked up at the ceiling, finally feeling myself beginning to relax from my previous feelings of anxiety I had in the back room. I closed my eyes, and the foot of my bed depressed. The box springs creaked, and the covers tightened over me. My heart dropped and I became petrified. It was unmistakable. Someone had just sat on the foot of my bed. The feeling of dread consumed me. I closed my eyes tight, expecting the situation to reverse, but it didn't. My gears started turning as I started thinking about what to do. I could run, but what if this person or thing was faster than I was? I could scream for help, but risk alerting whatever was there. Around me, I could hear sounds identifiable as my family members, sniffing, coughing, etc. This wasn't a prank either. Someone was on my bed, and they weren't leaving. Seconds passed and turned into minutes. I remember being petrified. Maybe if I could pretend to be asleep, the issue would go away. I didn't move a muscle, but I made a decision. I was going to peek. I opened my eyes and let my eyelashes filter anything terrifying I may have seen. But there was nothing there. Somehow, this brought me no relief though. All night long, I managed to sweat profusely and turn on my side, finally falling asleep from exhaustion. I woke up a couple of hours later and immediately noticed a difference in the atmosphere. There was no weight on my bed or sense of dread. I told my mother about it. Her and I are very different people. She is really spiritual, and I'm just not completely convinced yet. She really believed that I was paid a visit by my great aunt, but I don't believe that at all. The whole situation just didn't feel right or good. Despite not seeing anything, I am not mistaken in my experience. Something or someone was on my bed for a very long period of time. I truly believe I witnessed evil at first hand. I'm a 30-year-old woman living in Texas, and I've met my fair share of creeps, but what happened to me yesterday takes the cake. I don't drive and I work in another city, so I take the bus to and from work, using mostly the same stops on a daily basis. I just started using public transportation last year, so I'm mostly pretty comfortable with it by now, which makes yesterday's experience all the more unnerving. I had gone to the store after work for some soda, so I had a reusable bag with 2 liters in one hand and my purse in the other. Approaching the bus stop, I saw a woman sitting inside. It's one of those shelter-type bus stops, and while I'm normally very shy and won't sit down if someone is there, I considered it because I was feeling fairly sick and my feet hurt after being on them all day. But that idea quickly disappeared when I got closer and could hear her muttering to herself. I did a quick glance over as I walked past, and I could see that she had bags spread out over the side of the bench and her shoes were off, so I concluded that she was probably homeless. And since her muttering to herself definitely put me on guard, I walked past the stop, maybe 2 yards away or so, and set the reusable bag down. Uncomfortable now, I pull out my phone and begin to text my best friend to tell her. And this is about when I started noticing what she was saying. She was saying things like, "Don't call me sweetie, I'll fucking murder you." Okay, heckle raised even more, and I'm so curious to take a peek over, but I figure it's probably best not to risk antagonizing her at all, as I don't want her to turn her attention to me. I keep messaging with my friend, and the lady is muttering the entire time. Things such as, "Don't call me sweetie, don't call me honey, don't call me anything." She's also saying things that I can't quite catch, but what I did was, "I'll wrap my hands around your throat and fucking kill you." At this point, I'm thinking maybe I should nope it out of here, but the bus is set to arrive any minute, and even though the station is just down the street, I'm reluctant to try for it because I just really want to get home. Stupid, I know, but she hadn't done anything to make me think that she'd even noticed I existed yet. Around this time, I hear her begin to say things about a fat slut. Now, this certainly alarms me, as I am not a slim woman, and slut is fairly gender specific. But what sends shivers down my spine is when I hear, "Your phone doesn't scare me." Clearly, she's speaking about or to me now, as I've had my phone out since I got there. Just as I'm about to grab my bag, I look to the side. She's now just outside the shelter, staring at me with a look of intense hatred. There's still maybe 1.5 yards between us, but it's not enough to make me risk leaning over to pick up that bag and possibly give her an opening. She starts again with how I've got to stop calling her sweetie, but now I can hear the other stuff that I was missing before. Things about how she wasn't going to fuck me, she wasn't going to worship me, I wasn't going to cost her morals or relationship with God, and just all kinds of crazy shit. I'm looking everywhere at this woman, completely terrified as she keeps talking about murdering me and putting her hands around my neck. She sits down, and I, completely idiotically, am frozen to the spot, and I feel like I don't dare even lean over, even now that she's even a safe distance away. Also, this is taking place next to a very busy road that directly connects to a highway, so I think it gave me a false sense of security. She keeps muttering, and I slowly come to the conclusion my bus isn't coming, and am now near tears. And then she gets up again. She is much more vehement now, and I am completely terrified. The most scared I've been in my life even. I see the man crossing the street, and as he steps onto the sidewalk, I take a deep breath and hope for the best, lean over and grab my bag, and I nope the fuck out of there, watching over my shoulder the entire time. I walk down to the next bus stop and immediately call the police, who connect me to the right department, and I tell them what happened, although my physical description isn't very good since, as I told them, I hardly even glanced at her, because I was really worried about antagonizing her. Not long after that, a family member happened by and gave me a ride, so I didn't have to bother with the bus at all. Also, my brother lives in an apartment complex just down the road from that stop, and he told me she'd been sleeping there for about a week, and he had a minor encounter with her last night, so I guess they didn't find her. But she was gone this morning and still gone this afternoon, so maybe someone else complained. I sure hope so, because not only do I fear for the safety of the people who come into contact with her, but I also feel sorry for her and hope she can get the help that she needs as well. This happened 2 nights ago, when me and my partner were leaving the cinema after watching a film that ended at around 11 p.m. We grabbed a Costa and headed out to the car park at around 11:20 p.m. It was dark and quiet, seeing as we'd been to watch a film that had already been released a while ago, so by the time we came out, it was really quiet and there weren't many people around. We had parked at the far end of the car park, as we'd popped across the road to get some snacks before the film. There was just us on that side of the car park, and a few other people paying for their tickets at the front near the entrance of the cinema. There are tall bushes surrounding the car park, which have a road on the other side, which was also relatively quiet at the time. My partner and I are chatting away, when we both hear this odd noise. It sounded like when 2 cats are fighting, or preparing to fight, and sometimes can sound like a baby crying. It's a noise that often makes me apprehend immediate danger for some reason. It's almost piercing. Both my partner and I looked at each other and made note of it, and expressed our mutual creeped out feeling, and quickly headed to the car without seeing or hearing anything else. We pulled up to the barrier, inserted our ticket, and drove out. There's a short bend round to your left, and you come up to the junction of the currently quiet road. Left is back past the car park, and right takes you up some islands in the other direction of the motorway. My partner is driving and pulls out left to head towards the way home. As he pulls out and we're passing the bushes on our left with a car park on the other side of them, we both notice a figure crouching on the pavement facing the bushes. It looked like a male because of their stature, but they were quite thin and tall, and he was sort of tucking his head into his chest, trying to form a ball-like shape. It's worth noting that there are a number of homeless people in the area, and therefore a small drug problem. I'm not sure if this is related to him, but it could be. For some reason, his behavior caused me concern. I'm not sure whether it was the nature of my job to pick up on odd behavior, but I just felt like I should watch him for a moment to make sure that he didn't need any help. He wasn't tying a shoelace or looking for something on the ground. This was clear. My partner even said, "What's this guy playing at?" And in the nicest way possible, he doesn't pay much attention to anything usually. It was just really odd, the shape he had formed, and his slight rocking forward and backwards. Like, what the fuck was he doing late in the evening like this? Could he be hurt? So about 20 yards after passing him, we approach a small island, and I ask my partner to pull over onto the left-hand side just for a moment, so I could watch this guy in the side view mirror, or the passenger side, where I was sitting. We watched for around 2 minutes when this guy moved onto all fours and began sort of crawling in the direction of our car. This is where I began to panic and thought that this guy may actually be hurt and really need our help. It was like he was struggling to pull himself along. I think I was pretty naive and silly in my next move, but anyway, I opened my door and took a step onto the pavement, turning to face this guy. My partner also had his phone ready to call 999 if the guy was hurt, but but as I turned, I saw him lift up and stand upright. He was tall and slender, and he started to pick up his pace and jog with no signs of slowing down. This guy wasn't hurt at all. It was like he stood up and had transformed into a perfectly healthy late-night jogger, except he was heading straight for us. I hopped right back into the car and screamed at my partner to drive. Luckily, the island was clear and we sped away out of sight. We didn't turn to see if he was still there or spend any more time worrying for his safety, just our own. We got home and debated about what to do, but decided not to report it, as he hadn't attempted to hurt us or anything. And from the low visibility, all I remember about his description is how tall he was and that he was a male, so there was nothing to go off anyway. I don't know if the sounds were related, but where we were passing and heard the noises, it corresponds exactly with where he was crouching and maybe peering through the bushes. And that is a huge red flag for me. Why was he making noises to attract attention from passers-by in such a creepy way? And had he watched us get into our car, and was he waiting for us? I'm really not sure, but it all just seems so calculated looking back. As I said, I don't know if he was on drugs, or was going to try and mug us for drug money, or whether he was just out of his mind. But either way, I wouldn't have liked it for him to have reached our car, and I'm glad my gut kicked in, and we drove away, and never found out what he wanted. So, this happened a few years ago, and I just very recently remembered it. For a little background, I'm a 20-year-old female from Germany. When I was 17, I was in a long-distance relationship and was desperate for some extra cash because I spent most of my pocket money on train tickets to go see my boyfriend. So I put up a babysitting ad on a German equivalent of Craigslist. I soon got a call, not an hour after putting up the ad. I was greeted by the voice of a man. The conversation started off innocently enough, with him telling me that he had an 8-year-old and needed someone to watch him after school as both him and his wife were working full-time. I told him sure, I could do that. I expected him to ask me about my experience with kids or something to that effect, but instead, he went on to tell me that his son could be a little difficult. I told him that I didn't mind and that I'd find a way to deal with it. And then he said, would you hit him if he's being naughty? I was very taken aback by this question. I'm very against violence being used on children. Even spanking is child abuse in my eyes. I told the man that, and that I'd do my best to find a non-violent way to deal with the problems. But then he asked, what if he was hitting you? Would you hit back? I replied with a firm no. At this point, I was starting to feel angry, as it dawned on me that it was obviously a common occurrence for this child to be hit. He kept on throwing scenarios at me and asked me if I would discipline his son in that situation, and that his older baby sister apparently frequently spanked him. I eventually told him, as politely as I could, that if a parent chooses to use spanking as a form of punishment, that was their business. But as a babysitter, I had no right to hit a child. He went silent for a while. Then he asked me if I would bathe his son. I honestly don't remember what my exact response was, but it definitely wasn't a yes. He went on explaining that his son was supposed to take a bath every Thursday and that he hated taking baths. He wanted to know how I would make him get into the bathtub and if I would strip him naked. At this point, all the red flags came up. I dodged the question as best as I could and said something to the effect of, things like that are a parent's job, not a babysitter's, and that parents should make him take his bath in the evening after work. But he kept pressing, asking things such as if I'd wrestle his naked son in the bath. I just kept saying no until he eventually said that he'd call me back. I removed my phone number from the ad immediately and told people to contact me via email instead. I also got a new phone number, for reasons unrelated to this unsettling phone call, a few weeks later, so I luckily never heard from him again. I just hope his son, should he actually have one, which I honestly kind of doubt, is okay. This story was one that my mother told me. Apparently, I was there when this occurred, but was too young to remember. I guess I can be thankful for small favors. It was Christmas Eve sometime in the early 1990s. My mother, grandmother, and I were coming back from getting a wreath to place on my grandfather's grave, who had died some years before this incident. We picked out one of those ones with the steel legs you can prop up next to the tombstone. It was just at the end of dusk, and since it was the middle of winter, it was getting dark rather early. My mother decided to wait until that night to place the wreath because of the recent thefts in the cemetery, and colder weather was coming in, so she wanted to get the wreath in before the ground froze. The cemetery is located in the outskirts of our small town. Nowadays, the land around it is used and has a high school track bordering the headstones. But back in the early 90s, there was nothing around it but a decent-sized forest area and some cornfields. We live in Illinois, so open space is the norm. It's also pretty common to have coyotes in the area, especially back before the land surrounding was built up. So it's getting dark, enough that the headlights are needed. My mum pulls into the cemetery and goes to turn into the path that leads toward the section of the graves where my grandfather is. As they turn the corner, my grandmother tells my mum to stop the car and asks, "What the hell is that?" My grandmother motions towards the grave and sees something my mother still struggles to describe, even to this day. The best way she can is that it looked like a large white dog, but unlike a dog, it was standing on its hind legs. Not like a dog, but like a person, 2 legs and having no problem balancing. Not like its front legs were wounded and it needed to put pressure on its paws, but freaking standing up. She said once she got past the fact that there is a big-ass white dog of some kind just casually standing on its hind legs, making it around 6 feet in a cemetery at night, she noticed its eyes. Although she had the car headlights on, they weren't directly illuminating whatever this dog or creature was, but its eyes were glowing, a piercing white blue, as my mum tells it. She continued that as my grandmother and I sat in the car, this creature began to walk, or she says danced, around the graves. It apparently weaved in and around in circles, all the while on its hind legs. They watched for only a few minutes, but were completely frozen, unsure of what they were witnessing. Despite the area being known for coyotes, as mentioned, my mother swears that this was not a coyote, based on its white coat, height, and mannerisms. Whatever it was, they weren't sticking around to see what it would do if it noticed them though. My mum backed the car out and drove away as quickly as possible. From time to time, my mother still brings up this story. Unfortunately, my grandmother has since passed, and I never got to hear her description of whatever they saw dancing between the graves. After listening to this channel, and others like it, more and more, I feel that this may have been a skinwalker. Or, I don't even know. If anyone has any suggestions or similar experiences, let me know. I'd love to learn more. Our family has had some pretty bizarre experiences before, but this by far is the most unnerving. Needless to say, we didn't end up leaving that wreath at my grandfather's grave that night.